Okay, it seems like we've got most people coming into the webinar, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. So this is the information session for academic faculty and industry professionals who are interested in attending SCADS or the Summer Conference on Applied Data Science in the summer of 2025. Um, if you are a student or government researcher who's interested in SCADS, that's great. You can listen to all this information, but just be aware your application process is going to be different and on a different timeline, and we will send out that information then. But my name is Dr. Matt Schmidt. I am the PI for the Lab for Analytic Sciences and one of the members of the SCADS 2025 Planning Committee. Um, I'm going to talk to you today, give you a little introduction about the Lab for Analytic Sciences overall, uh, some history and overview of the summer conference, and how that summer conference looks for the faculty and industry attendees. We'll get a little bit into the grand challenge that motivates SCADS, and then some of the research focus areas that come out of that grand challenge. And then we'll wrap up with a quick explanation of how to apply to the conference and open the floor to any questions. If you do have questions, go ahead and throw them. You should have a Q&A feature on Zoom that you can drop questions into. Go ahead and put them in there. We have people monitoring that. They may be able to respond. If not, in the Q&A system, they'll kind of hold those questions. We can kind of address them at the end of the webinar. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so SCADS is hosted by the Lab for Analytic Sciences, or LAS, is what we'll typically refer to it as. LAS is a lab that was created in 2013, particularly with the purpose of developing collaborative research projects between government, academic, and industry researchers. It is a partnership between North Carolina State University and the Department of Defense. It's located here in Raleigh, North Carolina on NC State Centennial Campus. And we have staff here working year-round on projects focused on rapid prototyping of potential solutions to intelligence challenges through the application of the latest data science, AI, and machine learning research. Most of our projects at LAS involve collaborators from outside of LAS. So that's usually other industry partners or other academic faculty from NC State and pretty much other academic institutions across the United States. So if you go to the next slide, the summer conference on applied data science is essentially LAS in miniature. So instead of a 12-month, year-long cycle, SCADS is focused down to 8 weeks in the summer. But during those 8 weeks, we're focused on trying to prototype and develop solutions that are applicable to a multi-year grand challenge. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that grand challenge is later in the talk. But for now, I'll quickly say the grand challenge is about how do we potentially build out a tailored daily report to support knowledge workers, particularly intelligence analysts. So the attendees at SCADS are typically faculty and industry professionals. They involve students, almost exclusively graduate students, and as well as government researchers and particularly operational intelligence analysts from the government. So there's a wide variety of attendees, and we bring all of them here to Raleigh in the summer for those 8 weeks to enable that sort of close collaboration that can potentially lead to some interesting outcomes. Next slide. So As I mentioned, this particular info session is targeted to our faculty and industry attendees. And so, real quick, the role that we ask faculty and industry attendees to play at the conference is somewhat similar, but also somewhat different from the role that we ask the students and the government attendees to play. So, just like everybody else, we are going to ask SCADS attendees to be in person for the duration of the conference. That's the full 8 weeks in Raleigh, North Carolina. Um, if we have a couple holidays during there, there's July 4th, there's Juneteenth. We do work around those. Sometimes those can turn into 3-day weekends. We'll work on the schedule that way. But we really are trying to use this as an opportunity to enable collaboration between the attendees. And if people aren't in person, that becomes more difficult. So we are looking for people who can dedicate as much of the 8 weeks to being in person in Raleigh as possible. Uh, all attendees are going to be asked to present and write up the results of your work during the 8 weeks. So many of the projects that SCADS turn into research papers that are published outside of SCADS. So they may be the start of a project. They may be a quick demo of a capability that then gets later expanded into a peer-reviewed research paper. But we also want to capture what work was done during the 8 weeks. So all of the projects will be asked to produce a technical report capturing the data and the results that were generated during the summer. And as faculty and industry attendees, one of the things that we ask of you particularly is we want you to bring and take the initiative to engage with the other attendees, right? It's not, uh, we're not looking for people who are going to come for 8 weeks and kind of hole up in the corner and do their own research for 8 weeks. Again, we're trying to enable that collaboration. We're dealing, we have attendees who have, not quite as much experience in these types of environments as hopefully you all will have. And so we do ask that faculty come with the mindset that they are going to, engage some of the other attendees in their work, right? And so that, there's a lot of things that we'll do to kind of help with that, but we do kind of need the faculty and industry attendees to take that initiative. Um, so let's talk about, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about what exactly a attendee will work on, right? I mentioned the grand challenge of producing a tailored daily report for intelligence analysts. So one of the things a lot of the projects will focus on is really prototyping some of the approaches to doing that, right? Working on components that help enable that type of solution, and then demonstrating that and getting that in front of users to get feedback on. Another thing that attendees will work on is actually, as we're doing that, we're finding a lot of research questions that need to be answered, right? And some of those are captured in what we call our problem book, which is basically a collection of the research challenges that we've identified through the previous years of working on this grand challenge, as in addition to some of the things that we are trying to target for this year. And so if people are working on research aligned with the research questions in that problem book, I think that's another sort of category of the types of things, the types of projects that you'd be working on at SCADS. As I mentioned, faculty and industry attendees have the role. We do ask you, you will be leading some of these projects, but we also ask that you contribute to other people's projects, right? There will be enough projects going on that you will probably be involved in more than one. And while we do ask for your initiative and your expertise to lead those projects, sometimes your expertise can be useful on others' projects as a subject matter expert or as a contributor going towards a different approach or a different idea, right? So we do want you to lead projects, but we also want you to be involved in others' projects. And then, as I mentioned, we are going to have students, we are going to have junior researchers, we're going to have people who haven't had a lot of experience in a research environment, and we ask that our faculty and industry attendees serve as some mentors and guidance towards how to approach an environment like SCADS. Next slide. So so far I've kind of talked about like what we expect of the attendees. You know, it's worth taking a minute to kind of be explicit about what attendees can expect from SCADS. So the first thing, just to get out of the way, is we do expect to compensate our faculty and industry attendees for their time. We have a participation stipend of around $24,000 for the 8 weeks. We will also cover your lodging. We have some hotels in the area that we pay for rooms, and uh, as well as enabling some of our attendees, if they so choose, we can just give them a housing stipend and they can arrange their own Airbnb or their own lodging. We do pay for people to come to the conference at the beginning of the summer, and we pay for people to get back to their typical location at the end of the summer. But we don't necessarily pay for travel to and from your home location during summer. So if you do want to go home for a 3-day weekend or something like that, that would be required to pay on your own, but we can pay at the beginning, at the end of the conference. Both the lodging and the travel are tied to the fact that people are traveling to Raleigh, so you have to live outside of 35 miles from Raleigh, North Carolina. But we do expect most of the attendees to be in that bucket. Some of the benefits that we are offering to people who are interested in participating in SCADS. So as I mentioned, one of the main goals of SCADS is to enable this collaboration across sectors, across technical areas, between researchers and operational analysts, right? So if that's an environment that excites you, we would like to talk to you about participating. Um, there's a large degree of different expertise that we are bringing into SCADS. We try and find people that can bring lots of different perspectives on the problem. And as I mentioned, we bring in both researchers as well as people who have more experience developing uh, software and applications, as well as people who are looking at this from a user perspective of how would I, want to use a tailored daily report. All right. So really the biggest benefit to participating in SCADS is really getting a chance to work closely with a wide variety of skill sets, experience, and expertise. Next slide. So the summer conference is in the summer. The actual in-person event is between June and July of 2025. It's an 8-week event where the first week we're kind of focusing on, getting everyone introduced to the problem, getting people up to speed, and really having people find the teams that they want to work on and the projects that they're going to work on for the 8 weeks. The 8th week is more focused on documenting the work that's been done and sharing it out. We host a kind of year-end symposium where we invite not just everyone who has participated in SCADS, but also some of our stakeholders from the Department of Defense to kind of see what work has been done. So a lot of that last week is around documenting what's been done and sharing it with both the attendees and the stakeholders. The real meat of the conference, though, is probably weeks 2 through 7, and that's where we're actually doing that iterative collaborative research. In addition to the 8-week event, we do host a virtual onboarding. It's usually multiple days where we kind of go through logistics, we go through expectations, we go through, what the research challenges are and start to get people thinking about what they might want to work on. That's usually held sometime in May. And then after the conference, we will put out a technical report that covers all of the technical work that's been done on all the different projects. And so the month after SCADS, we may be reaching out to people to kind of help clean up some of the documentation so that we can release that. There's also some classified activities that happen in August related to what comes out of SCADS, but those are primarily limited to cleared government invitees only. So that's probably not going to be something relevant for the faculty and industry attendees. Next slide. Uh, let's go back one slide, actually. There we go. So as I mentioned, the meat of the conference is usually in weeks 2 through 7. And just to give you a sense of what those days look like, right? Because this will not be an 8 week, we will have an agenda for you every day. We expect, during weeks 2 through 7, that most of the time you're kind of setting your own daily agenda. So we do expect people to be in person on campus. We typically have a building here on NC State's campus where all the attendees will have offices and places to work. And so there may be like one or two kind of plenary sessions where either there's an invited speaker or we're hosting kind of a plenary, what we call bull session, where people are kind of presenting nascent ideas, things that they're looking for collaborators on, or we may be doing kind of a lunch and learn type session around a particular topic, right? But then the majority of the day, the attendees are sort of self-organizing into either project team meetings or doing their own sort of individual work, or um, there will be different problem areas that kind of cross-cut projects, and those those groups may be getting together, kind of discuss how the different projects are going amongst themselves. Um, we do understand how much of an ask it is to be away from your home location for 8 weeks. So we don't actually expect everyone to be, on campus for 8 hours a day working exclusively on SCADS. We do expect, people will be taking an hour or two if you have graduate students back at your home location, if you have, um, you know, partners in your home organization that you're working with, you are able to set aside time to actually talk to them, keep them up to date on what you're working on, hear kind of how things are going outside of SCADS, and dedicate it to the things that, we realize everyone has a day job that would be coming. And so we understand that you will need some time during the summer to be doing that. We just want the majority of the focus to be on the summer conference. Um, and then, at the end of the day, people are mostly on their own. We do have some optional self-organized social events that'll be available for people to attend, but it's not going to be a mandatory, okay, now that you've spent 8 hours in the vicinity of everyone, we're also now going to make you all go out to dinner with each other as well. So it's a little bit more relaxed during those weeks, so that people can kind of breathe and think about some of the things that have been going on during the day. Okay. Next slide. So far, I've kind of talked generally what the experience is and generally what people will be asked to do. The rest of the talk, I'll talk a little bit more specific about what is the technical area that we're focusing on in the summer conference for applied data science, right? So the summer conference is a little different in that, this will be 2025 will be our 4th year of hosting a SCADS. And the common thread across all of those years is this grand challenge for the summer conference. And that is, we would like to leverage the advances in data science and AI and machine learning to generate tailored daily reports for knowledge workers that capture information relevant to their objectives and interests, right? So it's a very broad challenge, let's say. There's a lot of things that that could encompass, but it does kind of set the goal that we're looking for, right? Is we're looking for a uh, a system and a capability of generating, you know, here's the information that you should be aware of today, or here's the information that you could be relevant to what you're working on uh, for whatever reason, right? So if you go to the next slide, um, we'll talk a little bit about like, well, what does that mean? Like, what exactly is a TLDR doing, right? So the grand challenge doesn't necessarily specify like this is exactly what a TLDR is, right? And as we've worked kind of the past 3 summers, we've learned a lot about what a TLDR should be and a lot about what it shouldn't be, right? So we're not looking for something that is like a calendar assistant or a virtual assistant that's really tasking the user of, hey, you should be in this meeting right now, or you should be um, focused on this type of analysis or this particular um, task right now. The analyst will be working their analysis, and the TLDR should be supporting that. Um, that also means that we expect that the TLDR is probably going to be tailored uh, differently to different, whether it's different knowledge workers or different groups of knowledge workers. And that's going to require feedback and interaction with the TLDR, right? This is not going to be some static system that you go to, you read it, and you say, okay, now I know everything I need to know. It's going to require iteration, it's going to require tailoring with the user. So, what a TLDR should be doing for an analyst, right, is one, it should be expanding the scope of the data that's being analyzed, right? So it should be helping the user find information that they didn't know they needed or should be looking for, right? It should understand what the analyst is trying to do well enough that it can identify content in massive data holdings that the user wouldn't even have known to query for, right? The other way you can think about this is, you know, if I'm looking at this from the perspective of an intelligence analyst, um, the data that's coming in, I probably can't even read much of the data, right? It may be in another language, or it may be, you know, an audio recording or a video recording that's actually, you know, hours long. And that's just not something that I can, you know, quickly look at and say, oh, there's relevant information in there. Um, so the second bullet kind of looks at that of how do we make the inspection of the data that's being analyzed more efficient, right? How do we save the analyst time as they're going through the data? How do we help them look at different modalities and different language based content that they may not be expert in or familiar or even able to read? Um, there's also the concept that this is something that is dynamic, right? So if I'm doing my analysis one day, I go home, I come back, I'm not necessarily wanting to read all of the same uh, content again to get a sense of what's been going on for the past 24 hours. I'd like to know kind of what's new, right? What what do I need to know that's different from what I knew yesterday, right? Um, and then you can also think of this as a way that outside information or outside knowledge can be brought to bear on an analyst workflow, right? So if if I'm a language analyst and I'm reading foreign language content, and another language analyst realizes that a particular term is actually something that means something in that particular context, right? So maybe it's a particular location that's being used in code, or maybe it's, you know, has just a different meaning. How do I use that information to change, how I'm triaging the data that I'm looking at, right? And so are there ways that we can bring in external knowledge to inform what we're looking at? Is there ways that we can, facilitate collaboration between different members of the group? That's kind of what we mean there when we say, a TLDR should be helping bring that external knowledge into the analysis. Okay, next slide. So these sort of goals for a TLDR align fairly well with the focus areas that we have for SCADS, the research focus areas. Um, so one of our focus areas we've had from the beginning is around recommendation and recommendation systems, really trying to help the analysts find that information that they didn't know to look for, right? So we have looked, recommendation systems are not new. They're things that actually people have had a lot of experience with and have kind of a model of how a recommender system, you know, generally works, right? It observes the things that I'm doing. It observes that for a lot of different people, and then it recommends, based on what you're doing, I think this would be you know, the next movie to watch on Netflix or the next thing to buy on Amazon, right? Um, One thing we did want to kind of emphasize is over the past 3 years, we've learned that that's not exactly how a knowledge worker wants to make use of a recommendation system, right? They may be more interested in, okay, this is generally how I'm viewing the situation, but is there any data out there that could completely change my viewpoint, right? They may be looking for contrarian data, or they may be looking for, you know, they may have one analysis where they're looking for certain type of data, and they may have a completely different analysis that requires a completely different set of data. And the recommendation system needs to understand, you know, what type of analysis or what the analyst's goals are, so that it's not, essentially recommending content for one analysis when the analyst is doing another, right? So there's a lot of feedback and sort of user control questions that come up there. There's a lot of questions that come up around, how does the user understand why they're being recommended a particular piece of content? That's something we've seen is a real blocker for the use of a lot of recommendation algorithms in analysis, is that if the users aren't trusting the reasons why the algorithm is recommending something, they tend to just ignore it. As I mentioned, another complication that's really across all of the work at SCADS is that our data sources are going to be multilingual and multimodal. So how do we recommend content across those different languages and modalities? And then kind of the final thing that's specific for recommendation systems is we are looking at ways to do recommendation at scale, right? So we want to enable more data to be used in the analysis. And a lot of that requires, if we're going to leverage recommendation systems, those recommendation systems have to be able to scale to greater and greater amounts of content. So that's kind of a quick overview of recommendation systems. As I mentioned, when we come out with the problem book here in the next month or two, there'll be more specific questions. But generally, if these are things that you're interested in, you're probably someone we would like to talk to about SCADS. Next slide. Okay. Uh, so the next focus area is around summarization. Again, this really gets to that bullet point around how do we make the data or how do we make the analyst more efficient at analyzing the data, right? So one of the biggest opportunities we've seen, come out of the past couple of years of large language models and uh, these sort of new AI capabilities is their ability to summarize content in text. So whether it is the possibility of summarizing a much longer document into an abstract, or the possibility of summarizing a 3 hour long video in a short text summary. Um, there's the potential that we can make the process of sort of looking at and reading the data and extracting relevant information just much more efficient. Um, so that's kind of the motivation behind focusing on summarization. Um, in particular, again, a lot of the same flavors that show up in recommendation system focus area also are here in summarization. So we realize that different people are going to want the data to be summarized in different ways, right? The relevant information in a document may be different for two different users, and so how users tailor their summaries, what sort of feedback they're giving the system, is something that we're still needing to investigate to build a legitimate tailored daily report. Again, you know, if I'm giving you a summary but not necessarily giving you the full data, it's only more efficient if you don't read that summary and then say, I actually really want to read the full data as well. Uh, we could have just read the full data to begin with. So, um, you know, building that appropriate trust in the summary so that an analyst can actually use them to be more efficient, figuring out what that process looks like, figuring out, how the analyst learns to not trust the system. Those are kind of questions that we're looking at in the summarization area as well. And then again, much of the data is going to be multilingual, much of the data is going to be multimodal, and we need summarization methods for those as well. All right. Most of the summaries that prove out with really good demos are summaries of long English text, right? So what does it mean to summarize uh, long video? What does it mean to summarize, things that are in multiple different languages? Next slide. The final research area we want to focus on at SCADS is one that we call human-computer interaction. But this encompasses a lot of different things. And really the goal that we're trying to figure out here is, you know, we don't envision the TLDR to be a static report. It's something that the user is going to have to interact with, both in how the user is directing either the recommendation or the summarization methods, but also like how that information is being presented back to the user, how the user is able to, use that presentation to make their analysis more efficient and effective. So we're really looking for research and ideas of what that interface should look like. Um, Again, there's questions around how the analyst can be building appropriate levels of trust. There's questions around just how that interface is facilitating that feedback uh, and facilitating that direction with the automated recommendations and summaries. Um, there's questions around, how should this data should be presented. And then importantly, we have a lot of questions about how should we evaluate the different systems and components, right? There's already been a lot of ideas of what a TLDR should look like and how it should interact with a user. So if we're trying to, make progress on that, we need ways to actually evaluate what what is this particular idea of what a TLDR system looks like, or what is this particular method of summarization actually doing for the user as they are trying to go about their analysis. And so thinking about how we evaluate both the systems and their components and how we do that as part of the development process is really kind of where uh, that bullet kind of goes to. And if you go to the next slide, that really just kind of emphasizes we have these three focus areas, right? Recommendation systems, summarization, human-computer interaction. But the thing we're really kind of doing all of these in uh, the purpose of these is to build out some prototype solutions. And so we want to understand, if we have different ways of recommending content, what does that mean for a user's interaction with the TLDR, right? What does that mean of the purpose and value that a TLDR can provide for that user? So for SCADS 2025, we are going to have efforts built around incorporating some of the things in the focus areas into prototype TLDR solutions. We are going to have uh, sort of narrowly focused data sets that we can evaluate these solutions on, right? So some of the data sets that we're looking at include conversational speech, um, multiple, large amounts of documents uh, that are often not in English. And, the question kind of becomes, okay, if I'm looking through that data to try and find information that is relevant to my uh, intelligence need, how is a TLDR helping me? All right. And so we should be able to do that evaluation at SCADS 2025. We'll have the data sets, we'll have prototype solutions. We should be set up to do the evaluation, and then it's really just about kind of getting those ideas and those methods implemented so that we can start getting feedback. And really, the goal should be that we are iterating multiple times around those ideas throughout the 8 weeks. We're not looking to take the full 8 weeks to generate one idea. We kind of want to start exploring ideas within, the first 2 or 3 weeks, so that by week 8, we've kind of done a few iterations and we kind of can see these are the things that are really providing value. These are the things that are working. And these are the things that, were good ideas, but didn't really seem to translate into value. So we really want our academic faculty, industry professionals, and really all of the attendees to be able to thrive in an environment where they're working with real data and they're working with people who are able to iterate and quickly explore different ideas. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about how to apply. So we have a online application for SCADS 2025 that is up and available. You can scan this QR code. You can click the link when we send out the slides. I think the link was also in the email that notified you about this webinar. You go to that application. You can upload your CV or resume. There's a few short answer questions that we ask that you respond to give us a little sense of sort of where your motivation is in participating in SCADS. And then we are going to run kind of a two-phase application process. So we have an early application deadline where we'd like people to get their applications in by 11:59 on November 3rd. That'll allow us to kind of do a first review and send out acceptances to get people by the end of November knowing like, okay, yep, like I can start planning to be in Raleigh in the summer of 2025. That said, that is an early application deadline. We know that some people's plans don't firm up that quickly. And so we do have a secondary and final application deadline of 11:59 on January 13th. That's when we will actually close the application portal and we will evaluate and submit offers coming out of that in January and February. So if you go to the next slide, I think that covers the same information, right? So once people apply, we will reach back out to them to set up virtual interviews where myself and a couple of people from the uh, program planning committee will kind of talk to you a little bit more about SCADS and sort of your interests. And then for the initial early applicants, we do hope to make the offers by November 18th. And for the final and secondary applications, we hope to make any offers by February 15th. Um, we do have uh, between 12 and 13 slots available for faculty and industry attendees. So it is fairly competitive. Um, but we'd like to talk to as many people as we can and see where it goes from there. So I think that is all of the information that I had. If you go to the next slide, we can open it up to any questions that may have come in, or we can wrap up. Okay. Does look like there's one question here about the QR code has a message of being available on October 9th. Um, I think that's something we can check and make sure that's live when we get there, or when we get done here. But that will be live, if not now, very shortly. Um, so there's a question around, will there be an information session for graduate students? So the answer to that is yes. That is going to be uh, coming out, or it's going to be scheduled in December or January, most likely January. Um, and so, like I said, that application process is going to run on a different timeline, but there will be a separate process for graduate students. Um, Next question, how does summer conference correlate to the grants that are funded through LAS? Um, so there's no formal like guarantee that work done at SCADS will definitely be funded for 12-month projects. We do align our sort of 12-month uh, proposal process with SCADS. So usually the efforts that are going on at SCADS, if there's something that you do want to or you think would be useful to continue as a 12-month project, you can submit it as a proposal and then it'll get evaluated through the 12-month process. If it gets accepted, that work probably wouldn't start until January of the following year. So if you come to SCADS 2025, you get really interested in something, you submit it for a 12-month project, it gets accepted. The 12-month project wouldn't start until January 2026, so there would be a bit of a gap there. But it is a possibility. It's one of the ways that we get ideas for 12-month projects, but it's not a guarantee. I'll say that. Okay. Um, Next question, do we apply through a university or individually? Go ahead and apply individually. Um, like I said, we've got the link to the online application. That's something you can fill out just for yourself. Um, Most of the attendees, the stipends are paid as independent contractors. If that's not something that your organization will allow, we can talk to you about other options. But we do want to at least try the individual independent contractor route first. And then if that's not going to work, we can kind of move on to other ideas. Um, So then the last question here is parking on Centennial campus covered by the program. Um, so there will be transportation provided from the hotels that we have access to Centennial campus. That's usually provided in lieu of paying for parking for the whole summer. Um, Again, the details on that may change a little bit, but right now Parking on campus is not something that the conference will pay for because we have the shuttles to the hotels. Okay. So with no more questions in the chat, we'll go ahead and wrap up this info session. I'll stay online for a couple more minutes, but if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the email listed here on scads-apply@ncsu.edu. We can get back to you pretty quickly, and if we need to, we can set up a virtual call and talk through any questions you have. So thank you everyone for joining today, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.